She told me I worked too hard, but that night, when the office was empty, she kept me in her room a little longer. I thought it was about files and deadlines, but her eyes said something else entirely. The office was quiet that night, the kind of silence that makes you hear the hum of the air conditioning and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. Everyone had already left. Rows of empty desks stretched out like a reminder that I was the only one who couldn't seem to put my work down. I was bent over a stack of reports, eyes burning from staring at numbers too long, when I heard the click of heels on the polished floor. At first, I thought it was just the echo of my own exhaustion, until her voice followed. "You're still here." I looked up, and there she was, my boss. Her silhouette framed by the soft light spilling from the hallway. She wasn't carrying the usual sharp edge of authority she wore during the day. Instead, she looked softer, almost curious. "I just wanted to finish this before morning," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "I don't like leaving things halfway." She stepped closer, her perfume subtle but noticeable, the kind of scent that lingers in a room even after someone's left. She glanced at the files, then at me, shaking her head with a small, almost amused smile. "You work too hard," she said quietly. "You're young. You should be out somewhere, living." The words caught me off guard. No one had ever told me that before. Most people praised me for my dedication. But the way she said it, it wasn't criticism. It sounded like concern. "I don't mind," I replied, maybe too quickly. "I guess I feel like, if I don't give my best now, I'll regret it later." She leaned against the edge of my desk, close enough that I noticed the faint shine of her earrings in the low light. "I used to tell myself the same thing," she murmured. Her voice dropped, almost as if she were speaking to herself more than me. "But work will never love you back. It won't hold you when you're tired. It won't sit beside you when the world feels too heavy." The room felt smaller after she said that. Her words lingered, wrapping around the silence between us. I didn't know how to answer. She looked down at me then, her eyes steady, almost searching. For a moment, she wasn't just my boss. She was a woman who had lived more years than me, who carried stories I couldn't yet understand. "You should go home," she said, though her voice was gentler now. "But, since you're here, come to my office for a minute." I don't feel like leaving just yet either. There was no order in her tone. No demand. Just an invitation that I couldn't quite refuse. As she turned and walked back toward her office, I hesitated, my hand resting on the unfinished report. The sensible part of me told me to pack up and leave. But something in the way she'd looked at me, half stern, half vulnerable, pulled me after her. I gathered my things slowly, my heart beating louder than it had any right to in an empty office. By the time I followed her, the night already felt different, as if I had stepped across an invisible line I hadn't even known was there. Her office light was still on when I stepped inside, warm and golden against the darker hallways. Unlike the rest of the floor, her space felt lived in, framed photographs on the shelf, a jacket draped neatly over her chair, a small plant on the windowsill struggling for daylight. It felt less like an office and more like a reflection of her, orderly, composed, but carrying little touches of softness that most people probably overlooked. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit. I'll make us coffee. You look like you need it." I started to protest, tell her I was fine, that I didn't want to be a burden, but she was already at the small coffee maker in the corner, pouring water with practiced ease. Her movements were calm, deliberate. Not rushed, not stressed. Just human. It was strange to see her like this, away from the crisp authority she usually carried in daylight. When she placed the mug in front of me, I noticed the faint steam rising, curling in the still air. The smell was rich, comforting. She sat across from me with her own cup, sighing as though she hadn't exhaled properly in days. "You really don't leave anything for tomorrow, do you?" she asked, watching me over the rim of her mug. I gave a small laugh, embarrassed. "I guess not. I just feel like, if I stop, I'll fall behind." Her eyes softened. That was me once. 22, 23, chasing every deadline, believing if I just worked harder, I'd outrun the fear of failing. She paused, her gaze shifting to the window where rain tapped gently against the glass. "But you don't outrun it. You just tire yourself out." Her honesty disarmed me. It wasn't the kind of wisdom shared in staff meetings or performance reviews. It was personal. A piece of herself she hadn't needed to give me, but did anyway. You regret it? I asked. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, the spoon clinking softly. Some of it. The missed dinners. The friends I stopped calling back. The years I traded for a title. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. But maybe regret is too strong. Let's just say, I sometimes wonder if I chose the wrong things to be loyal to. I didn't know what to say. My instinct was to reassure her, but the truth was, her words struck too close. I had been doing the same, pouring myself into work, as though it would fill some unspoken emptiness. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, thoughtful. The rain kept its rhythm, almost like background music meant for that very moment. I noticed then the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, an unguarded motion that made her seem younger, softer. Her gaze found mine, lingering just a little longer than necessary. You don't have to do what I did, she said quietly. You don't have to let work take everything from you. Her words felt less like advice and more like a plea, though I couldn't tell if she was speaking to me or to a younger version of herself she still carried. I nodded, my throat dry, and for the first time since I'd joined this company, I didn't feel like her employee. I felt like someone she trusted enough to let the mask slip. And in that quiet, I realized something I shouldn't have. I wanted to know more about her than any file or meeting would ever reveal. The coffee had gone cold on her desk, forgotten somewhere between our conversation and the silence that followed. I was leaning back in the chair, pretending to focus on the rain streaking the window, but really, my attention was pulled to her, every gesture, every pause, every shift in her expression. She sat across from me, her chin resting lightly against her hand, studying me in a way that felt personal. Not the way a boss measures an employee, but the way one person tries to read another. You're carrying too much in your shoulders, she said suddenly. I blinked. Sorry. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. You're tense. You're sitting like the weight of the whole office is on you. I gave a soft laugh, rolling my shoulders as if to prove her wrong, but the motion only made the stiffness more obvious. She shook her head gently, almost amused, and then, before I could process it, she stood and walked around the desk. Her heels were soft against the carpet, but every step seemed to echo in me. She stopped at my side, and for the first time, I felt her presence not as my boss, but as a woman close enough to touch. May I? She asked quietly, her hand hovering just above my shoulder. I nodded, though my throat had tightened too much for words. Her fingers rested against the fabric of my shirt, light at first, then firmer as she pressed into the muscle. Warmth spread from that single touch, and suddenly the quiet office felt smaller, closer, like it was holding its breath with me. You're wound up like a spring, she murmured, working gently at the knot in my shoulder. No wonder you never stop working. I wanted to answer, to say something light-hearted, but my thoughts scattered. All I could register was the heat of her hand through the thin fabric and the way her perfume surrounded me, subtle, elegant, something I'd only ever noticed in passing before but now couldn't escape. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second marking how long her hand lingered. I felt both grateful and unsettled, grateful for the comfort, unsettled by how much I wanted it to last. Her fingers slowed, then stilled, but she didn't step away. She left her hand there, resting lightly against my arm. When I looked up at her, she was already watching me. Our eyes met, and in that stillness, everything unspoken pressed in around us. I knew this was just a small gesture, nothing more than a fleeting touch, but it carried the weight of something neither of us dared to say aloud. Finally, she pulled back, smoothing her hand against her skirt as though brushing away evidence. Better, she asked softly. Yeah, I managed, though the word felt inadequate for what I'd felt. She gave a small nod, returning to her chair, her composure carefully intact. But as I sat there, my shoulders still warm where her hand had been, I knew the moment had shifted something between us. We didn't speak of it. We went back to our coffee, our files, the rain. But no amount of silence could erase the truth. We had crossed a line, even if it was only with the brush of her hand. And for the first time, I wondered if she felt it too. The rain had slowed to a drizzle outside, but the quiet rhythm against the glass was still there, steady and calming. The office felt different now, less like a place of deadlines and more like a shelter from the world beyond. She sat with her elbows resting on the desk, fingers laced together, staring down at her untouched coffee. Something in her posture had changed. The poised, composed figure I'd always known seemed to shrink just slightly, as though she had set aside the armor she wore every day. "You remind me of myself," she said suddenly, her voice low, thoughtful. "Back then, I thought if I worked hard enough, I could make life behave. That if I pushed forward, I'd never have to feel left behind." Her words lingered in the air. I waited, sensing she wasn't done. She lifted her gaze, her eyes tired but unflinchingly honest. "But no one tells you what it costs. A marriage, friendships, pieces of yourself you don't realize you're giving away until they're gone." She gave a soft, humorless laugh, shaking her head. "I've led teams, signed contracts worth millions, but at the end of the day, I still walk into an empty apartment." I sat there, not as her employee, but as a man listening to a woman strip herself bare with nothing but words. It wasn't pity I felt, it was recognition. A loneliness I knew in my own way, though mine came from youth and hers from years of sacrifice. "I don't really fit with people my age," I admitted quietly, surprising even myself with the honesty. "They want nights out, trips, distractions. I keep telling myself that if I work hard now, I'll have time for all that later. But sometimes I wonder if I'm already missing it." Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. Instead, she studied me for a long moment, her gaze softer than I'd ever seen it. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't measuring my performance or judging my choices, she was seeing me. "You're not missing it," she said finally, almost whispering. "You're just living differently. But don't let work be the only thing you live for. Trust me, that's a mistake I wouldn't wish on anyone." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, yes, but filled with something real, like we'd let each other into rooms we usually kept locked. Her hand traced the rim of her coffee cup absent-mindedly, while I found myself tapping the edge of my pen against the desk, just to have something to hold onto. The glow from the city outside spilled through the blinds, painting soft stripes of light across her face. She looked up at me then, and I swear the room grew smaller. Her eyes held mine for just a heartbeat longer than was necessary, long enough to say what neither of us dared to voice. And in that quiet moment, the titles of boss and employee seemed to fall away. We were just two people, sitting in the same silence, carrying our own regrets and hopes. I didn't know it yet, but that night was no longer about reports or deadlines. It was about something far more fragile and far more dangerous. Her office was quieter now, as if even the walls understood the shift between us. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only the hum of the city far below. Papers were still scattered across her desk, the glow of the desk lamp giving everything a muted golden edge. She slid a file toward me, her fingers brushing the folder's corner. "Take a look at this," she said, her voice calm, steady, but softer than usual. I stood and moved to her side, leaning slightly over the desk so I could read the page. She shifted her chair to make room, but not much. Close enough that when I bent forward, our shoulders touched. It should have been nothing, a casual accident, an ordinary overlap of space. But neither of us moved. I could feel the faint press of her sleeve against mine, the subtle warmth of her presence just inches away. My chest tightened, not from nerves exactly, but from the awareness that this was no longer the safe, professional distance we had always kept. I pointed at a line in the document, my hand steady though my pulse wasn't. "This part doesn't match the earlier numbers," I murmured. She leaned in too, her hair falling slightly forward as her gaze followed where my finger rested. Strands of it brushed my arm, featherlight, sending a sensation through me I wasn't prepared for. "You're right," she whispered, though her tone felt less about the numbers and more about the closeness. Our hands hovered near the same page, separated only by the width of a breath. I could see the faint outline of her wedding band tan line, a trace of the life she had left behind. It made her seem both stronger and more vulnerable in the same instant. For a moment, Neither of us said anything. The sound of the clock ticking filled the silence, marking each second we stayed like that, shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand, neither pulling back. I stole a glance at her and found her already looking at me. Her eyes didn't dart away. They stayed, steady and searching, as if she was daring me to acknowledge what we both felt. I wanted to speak, to say something that would break the tension, but words felt too small for the weight of that moment. All I managed was a quiet breath. Finally, she leaned back slightly, though not all the way. Her hand moved across the page, brushing lightly against mine in the process. It could have been passed off as unintentional, but it wasn't. "Thank you," she said softly, though I wasn't sure if she meant for catching the mistake or for staying there with her. The line between us had thinned to something almost invisible. We hadn't crossed it fully, but we'd stepped so close to it that the distance hardly mattered anymore. As I returned to my seat, the warmth of her shoulder still lingered against mine, refusing to fade. I knew, and I think she knew too, something had shifted. And from here on, it would be impossible to go back to the way things were. The clock had slipped past midnight, though neither of us had mentioned it. The world outside her office seemed far away, reduced to the faint glow of city lights behind the blinds and the low hum of electricity in the walls. Time didn't feel real anymore, only the quiet between us did. She was sitting back in her chair, one hand propping her chin, the other idly tracing a line along the edge of a folder. I watched her in silence, aware of how tired she looked, yet how alive her presence felt in that moment. Something inside me knew I couldn't keep pretending. "You know," I said carefully, my voice lower than I intended, "you're not just my boss to me." Her hand stilled, resting flat on the desk. She turned her head slowly, her eyes searching mine as if weighing every meaning behind my words. "Don't," she said softly, but there was no conviction in it. Only fear, or maybe longing. I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing against my chest. "I can't help it. I've tried to keep it professional, I really have. But tonight, it feels like we're not just talking about work anymore." She drew in a slow breath, her fingers curling slightly against the desk as though gripping something invisible. "You don't understand what you're saying," she whispered. "This is complicated. It's not just an age difference, it's—" She stopped herself, her voice catching. "It's real," I said gently. "That's all I know." Her eyes flickered shut for a second, then opened again, shining under the dim light. She looked like a woman torn between two choices she couldn't fully live with either way. "I kept you here tonight because," she hesitated, her voice unsteady, "because I didn't want to be alone. I told myself it was about the reports, but the truth is, I just wanted your company." Her confession broke something open inside me. For weeks, maybe months, I had wondered if the tension I felt was one-sided. Now, sitting across from her, I knew it wasn't. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the edge of her desk. "Then stop fighting it," I said softly. "We don't have to decide what this means tonight. But don't tell me you don't feel it too." The silence that followed felt endless. Her lips parted, as though she wanted to protest, but no words came. Instead, her hand lifted, hesitant, trembling just enough to betray the steadiness she usually carried. Slowly, she reached across the desk, her fingers brushing mine. It wasn't an accident this time. It was deliberate. Her hand lingered on top of mine, warm, steady, as if she was silently admitting everything she couldn't say aloud. My pulse raced, but I didn't move away. I let her hand stay, anchoring us both in a moment too fragile to break. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "What are we doing?" I didn't have an answer. But as her fingers tightened just slightly around mine, I knew we had already chosen. Her hand rested on mine, and for a long moment, the world outside her office ceased to exist. It was just us, the quiet, the steady hum of the lights, the faint trace of her perfume in the air. My heart was racing, but I stayed still, afraid that if I moved too quickly, the spell would shatter. Finally, she withdrew her hand, slowly, as though reluctant to let go. She leaned back in her chair, but her gaze never left me. There was something raw in her eyes, something I'd never seen during the day when she carried herself with such unshakable authority. "This can't be simple," she said quietly, almost as if she were reminding herself. People would talk. There are risks for both of us. I nodded. I know. But I'm not asking for simple. I'm just asking for honest. Her lips parted, and for a moment, I thought she might laugh or cry. Instead, she whispered, honest. She repeated the word as if testing its weight. The truth is, I want this. But I'm afraid of what it could cost me. What it could cost you. The way she said it made me realize she wasn't only worried about herself. She was worried about me too. That thought alone made the ache in my chest deepen. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the desk. Then let's not name it yet. Let's not plan it, or explain it, or decide what it's supposed to be. Let's just admit that it's here. Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. She pressed her lips together, then finally nodded. Admitting it is already more than I thought I'd allow myself. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. Full of everything we couldn't say aloud. Full of everything we were both terrified and exhilarated to feel. She stood then, slowly, as though she was carrying the weight of her decision with her. I rose, too, the space between us suddenly feeling fragile, precious. For a second, we simply stood facing one another, unsure of how to cross the invisible distance. Then she stepped closer. Just enough for her hand to rest lightly against my arm, her touch warm through the fabric of my shirt. She tilted her head, her eyes soft but steady. I don't know where this goes, she murmured, her voice barely above a breath. I can't promise you anything beyond this moment. That's enough, I said. For me, it's enough. Her eyes closed briefly, as though those words had lifted something heavy from her. And then, almost without thought, she leaned into me. I wrapped my arms around her carefully, not pulling her close, but holding her in the way one holds something fragile. Her cheek brushed against mine, her hair soft against my face. Her hand found its place against my back, fingers pressing lightly as though anchoring herself. We stayed like that, just breathing, just existing, while the city outside moved on without us. There was no kiss, no dramatic promise, no certainty about tomorrow. Only an embrace that lingered longer than it should have, long enough to admit that what we felt was real. When she finally pulled back, her eyes met mine, and a small, unguarded smile curved her lips. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was a beginning. And in that moment, I knew I didn't need anything more than that.